Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us today for our second webinar in this series for emerging technology procurement. And today, we're going to talk about standards, interoperability, as well as accountability. I'm joined today by a panel of experts from across public and private sectors, and I'll introduce them briefly and then get into the conversation. First, we have Megan Brock, who's the Director of Strategy at Cavnew. Megan has spent her career in transportation, where she led travel demand modeling and feasibility studies for surface transportation projects across the country. Currently, as a strategy director for Cavnew, Megan focuses on defining deployable road solutions that deliver measurable public benefits and modernize corridor operations for state DOTs. Next, we have Madeline Chea, who's the Associate Director for Cybersecurity with Cambridge Consultants. Dr. Chea is an experienced cybersecurity and technology professional with nearly 15 years of experience in a range of sectors, including autonomous systems, computing, IoT, automotive, and future mobility. Her current client portfolio includes AI security testing and autonomous cyber defense work for industry and government bodies alike. Madeline has also won awards in automotive industry, including being named the top 100 great women in the British car industry and having won the Autocar Drivers of Change and Digital Innovation. And we're excited to include her on this panel today. Next up, we have Steve Griffith, who is the Executive Director for Regulatory and Industry Affairs Mobility for NEMA. Steve he oversees NEMA's engagement with regulatory agencies of jurisdiction and mobility. He leads a matrix team to develop strategies to advance NEMA's policy positions and desired regulatory outcomes, and actively engages on relevant regulatory agency programs and rulemakings, as well as serving as a subject matter expert on mobility sector issues and priorities for both internal and external audiences. Prior to NEMA, he managed various projects for the DoD as well as for the TSA. And finally, we welcome Matt Nichols, who is the Chief Cybersecurity Risk Officer for CalSTA. Matt brings over 20 years of public service with the state of California in both the judicial and executive branches. His current role as the Chief Cybersecurity Risk Officer within the California State Transportation Agency focuses on assisting with reporting departments on the maturity of their information security and risk management programs in alignment with state, agency, and departmental strategy. He has served on boards and is a member of local chapters of ISACA and ISC Squared. Matt is also currently a member of ITSA's cybersecurity community of practice and leading the discussion to develop recommendations to introduce cybersecurity into the MUTCD. And so, as you can see, we've assembled an all-star cast for this conversation today, and I'm delighted to have the opportunity to help moderate and facilitate this conversation. And so maybe just kind of getting into it and starting, with yourself, Matt, maybe tell us a little bit about the role that your organization plays in the procurement of ITS, and what are some of the key challenges as well as the opportunities?
Sure, Simon, thank you. Hello, everybody. So at the California State Transportation Agency, being that oversight body, it is a lot of engagement with the department, CHP, DMV, Caltrans, being RDOT, high-speed rail, and things of that nature, as they work in many areas of cybersecurity. We have that crossover between operational technology and IT, and how that transforms, especially with the ITS, even being at ITS California last week. Anyways, so our engagement as an agency is setting statewide policy. It's where the Secretary of Transportation of California resides, and all of his supporting casts that work on all the various policy at cargo areas and whatnot. We work with all of them and our reporting departments, how they are developing policy, following governance, treating any of their business lines, whether it's a support section of information services or information technology, as well as their mission critical business operations that they have and how they're trying to work together. Making sure that's in line with what the state is pulling together, the legislature is pulled together, the other state oversight entities that we have, and then really through departments. A lot of the departments we have really get into their SOC components, their actual response components, incident response, and things of that nature. So trying to help bridge that gap of the conversation between the operational folks and what's happening at the political side or the executive side. When it comes into the procurement side of things, we're getting into a lot of the business continuity planning as well as the other BCP budget change proposals that go through and what they're trying to plan out for the future, how our various districts are trying to pull in, advance their systems, upgrade from some of the legacy tech they have, just look to secure what they've been able to put in place, and then develop how they're approaching their contracts. So when we talk about our Department of General Services having all these statewide contracts and leverage procurement agreements, how are those utilized? What wording is needed if we need a policy change on that side? But then how do our various districts go through and leverage that to secure the technology they're really bringing in and make sure that it's utilized to the best ability? So that's how agencies utilize in that area.
That's fantastic. And I think, it sounds like there's a really obviously a technical component of the role and of the job, but then also, a very strong partnership component as well in terms of working with the various divisions as well as the districts in order to make sure that there's alignment between the requirements as well as kind of what the mission needs are in the field. And maybe this is a good dovetail into the next question, which is, talking a little bit about getting from standard or getting from requirements into standards. And maybe I'll start with you here, Steve, and tell us a little bit about the role that NEMA plays in the formation of standards. Why are they important? As well as, when do we get to the point of saying, hey, this technical requirement should become an industry standard, and what are some of the process and timelines, just to help kind of ground the audience a little bit.
Yeah, thanks, Simon. So NEMA is an industry trade association of about 300 equipment manufacturers that make safe, reliable, and efficient products and technologies. The mobility sector, which is the one that I lead, has a group that manufactures transportation management systems. These are, things that help enable intelligent transportation systems like traffic controllers, signal displays, dynamic message signs, portable traffic, connected vehicle infrastructure. And we know that the roadway infrastructure has evolved. It's no longer just concrete and asphalt. It's these sensors, it's communication, it's data analytics, it's real-time monitoring, adaptive signaling, improving traffic flow. I mean, these are things that the companies that are members like Swarco, McCain, Q-Free, Unix, Daktronics, they all make, right? And we do a lot of work with standards, right? We develop standards ourselves for ITS equipment. We also work with the Department of Transportation and other stakeholders in the NTCIP standards and the ATC standards. But the point of standards, they play a critical role in ensuring safety, reliability, interoperability across the industry, right? They're minimum performance and safety criteria. They help to ensure compatibility from products made from different manufacturers, help to align, or support relevant regulations, help to drive market efficiency and innovation, and develop through consensus. So you talk about a requirement becomes a standard when it goes through a process of consensus, validation, and publication. We have a governing body that kind of, oversees all our standards development. And usually a need is identified that could be a gap. It could be an inconsistency in industry practice. You talk about cybersecurity being one. We've had workshops where we can bring stakeholders together to address the issue, right? And from that, we can actually form a committee to draft a standard that includes, the definitions, performance criteria, the testing, the safety considerations. We get a draft and we circulate it out for public comment, both within our group, but also externally. collect feedback, make revisions, and then we kind of take it through the process to get it published. And then obviously when the standard is published, you want to get it adopted and referenced in regulations or contracts. We actually have to continually review our standards every like 5 years because technology changes, right? You got to keep pace with technology and market trends. We are pretty good. We're very nimble in that we can, when it comes to developing standards, we can usually get standards like a draft, from conception to final draft within a year. So that kind of helps, with this market that's so evolving to get standards out there to address, needs and prevent fragmentation. So a lot to, go into, but that's just a big introduction on it.
Yeah, that's really interesting, Steve. And yeah, I think it's good to lay that out for the audience to kind of appreciate just what goes into making a standard, right? It's not something that's done lightly, and it involves a lot of partnership, a lot of consensus building over fairly long time frames. At the same time, given the industry that we work in, especially as you mentioned with technology, that tends to move a little bit faster, a little bit quicker, beyond traditional procurement cycles, let alone standards development cycles. It's like, how do you kind of navigate that tension, right? And I would love
Yeah,
to, get into that in a little bit, but maybe
sure.
I will, bring in, Megan into the fold here, given your role at Cavnew and being, more of a technology-oriented company that's helping develop a future of transportation for a lot of your state and local partner agencies. Where does, a company like Cavnew fit into all of this, and how do you partner with various, public, private resource organizations to shape standards and requirements that align with their mission objectives, while also, balancing the ongoing pace of development for the technologies that your company oversees?
Yeah, thanks, Simon. As you mentioned, Cavnew is a road technology developer, and we really we developed what we call an integrated solution, right? We have hardware elements, software elements, data elements, and generally we found that in this industry, there's a there's a lot of specification around technical requirements that, but not always starting through an outcomes-based approach. And so we want to, as anybody who works in this industry, we want to see safer roads. We want to see more efficient roads. We don't want to sit in traffic. We want to see higher performance of these systems. And we kind of approach this question from that angle. Let's have, the public sector say these are the outcomes that we expect, and then allow the private sector to create clear traceability to how the solutions that we propose can deliver on those outcomes. The work Steve's doing is so important to make sure that we know, as a private, solutions provider, what must be true at different stages to be compatible with existing systems, to meet, security requirements, to meet privacy requirements, all of that. And where we then work with both the public organizations that we contract with and are starting to work with academic organizations is to say, all right, we know what we wanted to do. We had a hypothesis about what we brought to the table to meet that objective. Can we demonstrate some efficacy towards those objectives? And then can we say, public sector, these are the standards that we should set so that you're sure that the solutions you're procuring are actually delivering on the outcomes that you wanted to begin with. And that's like a long path, for someone like us, putting hardware, software, data all on the road. It takes some time. But like I said, the work that Steve just outlined is so critical as signal to us and to other private, companies working in this space, what needs to be true. And we just keep pushing on this traceability. When I was in a consulting role prior to this, we had to answer the question, like, how is how is our grant funding? How are we ensuring that our grant funding is doing what we said it would do? And that there, I found that like sometimes we set out to do something and we just don't always draw the through line between like what was the input, what was the action, what was the output, what was the outcome, and did all those things line up? The standards that Steve is mentioning, draw a path for us along that kind of framework to make sure that we're doing what we said we would do, and that, the funding, the resources, whatever it was that allowed us to do all that actually delivered what we wanted. And so that's how CAVNU approaches outcomes-based procurement. And it's non-trivial then to plug into all of these different systems. Standards help us just navigate that a little more easily.
No, that's really key, and I think it's great that you kind of bring the blend of your prior consulting experience with now working for a technology company and starting to see the value chain of the hardware, software, the data, which I think will kind of dovetail into my next question and maybe focusing a little bit on yourself, Madeline, and the role that you're playing at Cambridge. How is your organization approaching, the topic of supply chain assurance and resilience within this ITS context, and tell us a little bit more about that.
Of course. So here at Cambridge Consultants, I mean, we do consultancy, but we also do technology development. And typically for things like intelligent transport systems, so many things are kind of at that emerging stage, whether it's autonomous vehicles, whether it's 5G, whether it's AI. So all of these things means that we kind of have to think really carefully about that supply chain, which some of it may be from different fields almost. It's a very multidisciplinary area, right? We've got data science, computer science, biology coming in there with sustainability. So all of these things means that as we consider the supply chain, we've had to think about slightly different outcomes to what is traditional. So you've got I want my performance, I want my reliability, but at the same time, we have to think about, I want resilience and I want speed to deal with the pace of change. I want diversity of technology so that I have redundancies and fallbacks for that resilience. And along with that, I mean, the standards are kind of emerging as well in some of these areas, not all of them, but obviously like some areas like AI, they're still being shaped, they're still being made. And so in those fields, we kind of almost have to draw from a broader range of experience, all the way from traditional sort of automotive sectors right the way through to, very specific need sectors like trucking, right the way through to cloud platforms and things as a service, as we start to look at things like mobility as a service, for example, and what supply chain for that might look like compared to your more traditional, say, tiered automotive supply chain. So blending all this together is one of the areas that we found really, really interesting, and one of the big challenges, because the life cycles are different, the cultures are different. A programmer is probably going to think a bit differently to an automotive engineer, is going to think differently to a civil engineer who's building up the infrastructure. So all of these different disciplines, all of these different mindsets, we've had to kind of blend together, and the standards do help. So very much so, it gives a kind of certainty and clarity in certain areas. But at the same time, we've had to feel our way through quite a lot of it, and a lot of that is through assurance. So instead of that sort of deterministic pinpoint behavior that we used to expect, a lot of the outcomes that we're looking for now is, a percentage measure or percentage confidence that you've achieved something, or are you able to monitor to give us that percentage confidence that you've achieved that outcome, whether it's resilience or speed of innovation, etc.
Yeah, that's fantastic, and I think the theme of bringing a multidisciplinary approach, I think, is really smart and very much needed, just given the way our industry, operates, right? You need not just a combination of planning, engineering, asset management experience, but now you're also needing adding the technology, the hardware, the software, the data stack, to that too, right? Which I think will become increasingly important because we're not going to be able to build our way out of congestion at the end of the day, and we're going to have to find, other smarter ways to do that. And maybe, that's a good segue into kind of the next question. And this is more for, generally for, for the panelists here. But, tell me about something that you're currently working on that's very exciting, both for yourself and potentially for the audience. And how does the topics of standards or interoperability kind of play a role in that? Anyone want to go first?
Sure, I guess.
Go for it, Steve.
I'll have a couple of things that we've been working on. The comments about, as I mentioned earlier, the challenges with roadway infrastructure
Yeah.
becoming very complex. So we actually worked with ITSA to develop an outcomes-based contracting white paper. So the idea is that it's increasingly challenging for, state, even local or even rural DOTs to specify this kind of equipment. But what they do have is they have a problem they want to solve, right? So what's the problem or goal that you want to solve? You want to improve safety at an intersection. Well, you identify that problem, and then you align your procurement methods with those goals. You pick a vendor or a contractor that will design and implement a system to meet those goals, and then you're measuring, well, how well is that vendor doing? Is it meeting what they said it was going to do? And then you adjust based on that. So the vendors, compensation is tied to how well they do. So we think that's a real opportunity for, for agencies to when you're dealing with this kind of equipment, specify the outcome and let the vendor community design a solution to meet that, right? And I think that's something that makes procurement a lot more efficient when you're dealing with this technology. So that white paper was published earlier this year. We've had some very good feedback and conversations with even some state DOTs on this. So
Yeah, it's really helpful. Megan, I saw you came off of mute. Did you want to add to that and talk a little bit about the role, from a vendor perspective, right? How does the outcome-based procurement help?
Yeah, I think what Steve said is exactly right. And there are a number of states that I think do this really well. Um, and others that, are starting to ask the same questions to your point, Steve. I think, um, you know, a, a good example or perspective that we bring is, our CAB News data model, I think, has some really important information that needs to make its way to road users, right? Like we have sensors that know what's happening on the road, and we know that the importance of getting accurate, timely information and guidance to road users is core to delivering on the outcomes that we want to see on our roads, right? Um, there's not in this country a standard way to deliver messages to different partner networks that can push information to road users, in like their navigation apps that they're using now as a good example, right? We have some standard messaging protocols that vary by jurisdiction to physical infrastructure, but not always to digital. And we know, I would actually be curious to hear from Madeline about how this works in other areas. But that is, an example of somewhere where we then work with different messaging partners and we have to plug in different ways, which is fine for now, but obviously a scalable problem that I see Steve smiling because it's probably something he hears in many other domains, but as an example of something that we face. And maybe if I can play moderator and ask for Madeline's perspective on this as well, because I do know that in other jurisdictions, this is maybe something that's been addressed.
I mean, there is that interoperability problem here, and not just I mean, there are standards obviously for cellular and bigger sort of things, but for more shall we say localized needs, it's been really difficult. And it's not just for communications either. I've got an example for you. For example, might be unique to the UK, but one of the things that we've had a lot of difficulty with is sensor networks, because obviously intelligent transport needs sensors of all kinds. But we have a lot of cities that are filled with medieval stone buildings, and they kind of block a lot of the sensor signal. So even though we have a standard, the actual physics of it sometimes don't work. So it's that sort of interoperability as well, like taking into account the physical element. But other than that, I mean, the EU obviously has a set, and the UK and the EU have some alignment there. And of course, the UK and the US have other alignments through different manufacturers and whatnot. But you're very right. I think there's still work to be done in making sure that that's all interoperable. But yeah.
Yeah. No, I think that's very interesting. And, I always think about this um striking this balance between the need to solve a customer's problem and in a scalable way, which is like more the vendor perspective, right? And then, from a customer's perspective, it's, how do you solve my problem in a way that's very specific to me? And sometimes those are aligned, but in many cases, they might not be aligned. And that's where you kind of need the standards to come in and play a role, as well as, to have the interoperability. But there's no, one size fits all solution, right? And it's really about navigating the across that public-private, research spectrum to get the different parties to work together, on shared goals. But maybe I think this is also, a good opportunity to hear from yourself, Matt, as an executive with, the largest transportation agency in the U.S. and overseeing a portfolio of various districts that are working with vendors across hardware, software, data to plug into your network, right? And having to kind of provide some guidelines on how to procure and adopt those technologies, that benefits their missions, but also doing it in a secure way. So maybe talk about, kind of how you see the growth of ITS and the influence on asset management, strategic alignment. How does that come into play with procurement and some of the things that you've heard so far?
Sure, thank you. And even coming back to the rest of the panel's comments, the privacy of the information coming out of your public departments and what they're able to share back to private sector so they can make it useful. Sorry, I'm getting Teams messages at the same time. I'm the acting ISO today also. So making sure even before we get into a procurement area where we're putting out RFPs and looking for information, the state had done an effort to look for AI solutions to help bring along much of the data that Caltrans, CHP, and DMV and everyone comes into play. But the I don't even know if you guys hear that, but it's catching me. Anyways, how they're approaching that as a pilot to just get the feasibility of it, what can come in, what do their cameras, what do their sensors say, how could it be misused to track people, if it's looking at car types and we're blocking readers and faces, can that be tracked? What's going to be shareable, even between our own departments, because CHP does have a reason for some of it, but then what's going to be shared? So what does that data repository look like? Who's going to have access? What does legal say as we get involved? So they've got a couple of large efforts going through the traffic mobility insights, watching those cars go by, where's the traffic jams, especially with World Cup 26 coming up and then LA 28. How are those regions going to be able to manage the traffic, divert, change? What are they planning to put in place? But then also what we have is a vulnerable road user which is basically people on their bikes. How is that being tracked? And that's another effort. How can we go through and help those folks? So even before we get to procurement, what's the solution supposed to look like? What's the need supposed to be? And how do we make it safe for everyone that we can affect, but then turn around and share that data out? Because there's a lot of GPS data that's out there. I mean, GIS data, excuse me. But all of that's being shared, and you see Google, Waze, whatever, they have a lot of access to it. But at what point do you start getting into this network, especially with Caltrans, all of the sensors they have up and down the state, regardless of what type they are, all the partnerships across multiple jurisdictions with cities and counties, when you're talking traffic light signals, expressways, the cameras are in place that they work with. CHP is working with different municipalities on what they're doing with their cameras and how chain of custody can come into play for getting over to the courts. So all that has to happen before they can even get towards the the procurement side. Once we get into procurement, most of our, because we are a state entity, the requirements come about that it needs to be from the U.S. It can't be from some, it can be from some favored nations where the bill is coming out, but this is even prior to some of the most recent rules. It's like, where do you have access to that black box of the software that's living there? How much change do you have? How much trust do you have that's going into play? How does that get into our state procurement, leverage procurement agreements, excuse me. And what is the general effect of that, so that we are not, as a state entity, playing a favorite with one vendor or another also. They all have to have the ability to come at it. So it's trying to keep a level playing field and keeping in mind what the real need is. So we run through a lot of that. May not have been an answer exactly to what you're asking, but it comes into play on much of that. We get a bit of the asset management side when we're talking about that move from traditional OT networks, pump controllers on freeways, whether, other things that are tied to it that might just come back to an ICS or SCADA system on the side within a particular district. Maybe districts have different versions of it. And how does that then become the new age of technology that we need to have? And it needs to be on a network. It can't just be on a modem that goes back through a third-party service provider and comes back. How do you manage those things? So helping our departments make that transition is a lot of the conversation. I am not operational within those departments, so much of the effort that goes into it is going to be on them. The planning that they're putting in place, the development of the need is up to them, making sure they can see everything. They don't leave some items out. Maybe they're not aware of some of the other departments doing something similar. They have a partnership. We have a lot of partnerships with even business consumer services and housing, or with CNRA, the Natural Resources Agency, on how it affects the different things up and down California. So it's making sure that everybody can play well in the same sandbox. So yeah, that's, there's a lot of concerns, and not all the different departments not all the different offices within a department have thought about the same way that IT has traditionally. So we start bringing in cybersecurity, you start bringing in IT asset management, risk management for the entire enterprise, not just for a particular department. It's a bit of a culture change, and that ends up being a lot of our conversation. Hopefully I get back to the question.
Yeah, no, that was great, Matt, and a lot to unpack there. But maybe I'll just, take one thing I heard that really resonated, which is, how do you get the different partners to play together in the same sandbox, right? And that, to me, really touches on the theme of interoperability. When given that CalSTA not only manages multiple state level agencies, beyond Caltrans, you mentioned CHP and DMV. But then, of course, like within the state of California, those agencies also have kind of their county and regional counterparts, if you will, right? That, at the end of the day, they all work together to build, to operate, to maintain the road network that Californians travel on. Who at the end of the day, as an end user, they don't care what jurisdiction that they're going to. They're just trying to get to point A to point B. So maybe, from your perspective, when we think about interoperability, Where do you see as like some of the key things that should be focused on, at least from a starting point, right? Like I heard culture is, one, and there's of course the technology requirements themselves, but from your perspective, what are some, things to think about to enable a more interoperable system?
The breaking down of silos is a big part. I mean, SLTT has been a big acronym that we've used for the last 20 years, and the state, local, territorial, and tribal, and it's that sort of partnership with the idea that governance isn't a checkbox; it's something to come together to decide on which is the right direction, and then making sure you're putting it at a particular level for the scope being applied to. And then as that breaks out for the various levels of participants, then they refine and tighten as they see fit. Where you run into some issues can come in with turnover, with lack of understanding of how that big picture is going to work. I mean, cybersecurity, when I started as with network administration and being the guy that did Cisco, everything that Cisco put a stamp on, to where I am now, I grew up within IT. I didn't have this larger picture until I started branching out into some of these other departments and working with different people and getting a different perspective. The same thing has to happen whether you're in IT, a particular business unit, is what does the rest of your enterprise need to have to move forward? How do you, as an administrator, an analyst, a manager, wherever, understand where your leadership wants to go and how those conversations take place? It doesn't necessarily change everything about what you're working on, but it allows for those other conversations. You already know that if you run into the same network analyst at a city location, they probably have the same technical viewpoint that you do. We need to lock this down. You figure out which protocol you're going to use. We're off to the races as long as everybody's buying platforms that work together. But when you're when you're in that leadership position, you're trying to make those political conversations take place across multiple levels, federal, state, local. It's quite the maze to navigate. Is where you're going through and making sure those conversations. So being open to what's taking place, and for me, I'm fairly blunt and just speak honestly. I don't do a whole lot of games, and people usually know where I stand on things. So hopefully that's why they come back to me.
Spoken like a true technologist, a true someone with maybe with an engineering background. I usually find people who have the technical backgrounds to be of similar caliber. But yeah, I appreciate your thoughts on that, Matt. And maybe I'll swing the pendulum back towards the other end of the spectrum and maybe focus on some of our private partners here on the call, thinking about interoperability, right? And one of the things that we talked about is just kind of you know how do you work with a leader such as Matt from Calsta, who oversees a big portfolio within the California and multiple and works with different partner agencies. Like, how do you work together to achieve that interoperable goal? Particularly as maybe as a vendor, like your goal is to obviously continue to grow your business and having an approach that's scalable, is helpful. How do you kind of navigate that? With some of what you're seeing in the market today, and maybe, feel free to share one or two examples of how you've successfully navigated that.
Perhaps I can start with this one.
Yeah.
So when we work with large public bodies, a lot of it is about being flexible and agile. I mean, really, a lot of things like cybersecurity, risk management, it's all about uncertainty and dealing with that uncertainty. There's only so much we know or we can know. There's only so much we can see into the future. And because of that, it's very much a case of making sure that whatever we do, we make sure we're flexible, able to adapt. And I mean, that's one of the key forms of resilience is evolution and adaptation, along with anticipation. And for an example of that is looking also at future proofing what you do. Obviously, infrastructure works on decades-long timescales sometimes. So making sure that we are flexible enough to ensure that we don't cut ourselves off from possible avenues And an example of that is we've been working on advising on post-quantum cryptography migration with the National Energy Systems Operator here in the UK. So we've been doing a lot of work in tracking some of that quantum threat and looking to see whether that infrastructure can be migrated in such a way as to fulfill the national cybersecurity sort of aims and goals. And I believe there are similar initiatives happening in the US for this very purpose because of that very long life cycle. And it's that sort of flexibility, adaptability that allows us to match that uncertainty as we move forward, and also the pace of change as we move forward, because sometimes you do have to switch directions really, really quickly. And that's key.
Oh, thanks for that, Madeline. Megan, any thoughts from you?
Yeah, I'll just say, we we understand, like we work across, like I said, different states, different agencies, and we, just as Madeline said, do have to be flexible to the different protocols, be they privacy, cyber integration, across those different jurisdictions. And so for us, that means our system has to be designed in a flexible way. And that's how we approach this. And we keep things separate so that they can, meet all the different requirements of our public sector partners, and other partner, as I mentioned, like third party, alerting services, different, so we do have to be flexible, and we do have to create, that does mean some initial work to make it possible to kind of deliver different solutions in different ways. And that's fine. That's how it is. Like I keep saying, Steve's work is so important, to give us guidance on, what we might expect to have to do in different situations now and in the future. And I know this is a huge part of ITS America's position on allowing technology to evolve and not using really prescriptive standards on how the public or the private, how industry can deliver on some of those outcomes. But I do not say that like it's a straightforward thing to execute. Maybe Steve has some thoughts on that.
I mean, thanks, Megan. I mean, interoperability is definitely something we talk about, and I think I'm going to kind of tie back to what are the needs that that Matt mentions, right? And what are those minimum requirements to satisfy safety or cybersecurity, right? And then your vendors build on top of that. So you look at cybersecurity, we know that it needs to be implemented on both legacy and new systems, right? So if you look at our standard, look at the traffic controller cabinet. I hear stories about the traffic controller cabinets can be opened with the same key. Well, that cabinet should have a unique key, right? That's unique to that cabinet, right? And that's something that can be easily retrofitted on existing cabinets, right? You're addressing physical security on a cabinet. I mean, case and example is what VDOT did. And they went through and they upgraded all their cabinets to have unique keys, right? So there are ways to address, interoperability by focusing on those basic needs, trying to provide that balance with addressing security while also keeping the systems operational, right? So it's a challenge, and it's understanding the needs of the users like Matt and the other folks out there, and trying to design those standards that can be iterative too, right? Because they will evolve, right? I mean, they don't necessarily need to be 100%. They could be 80%. Get it out there to address a need and let the industry provide feedback on it. So, just my thoughts.
Yeah, well said. And I also like to add, we talk about interoperability as kind of this collaboration between, public and private. I would also like to, add that maybe we include the ultimate end user, which is the traveling public, right? And I think about, taking a road trip from where I live here in Atlanta, Georgia, to go visit in-laws in Wisconsin, the Midwest, right? And being able to drive across, multiple state lines and jurisdictions and highways, and being able to use, we have, Peach Pass here as part of our tolling network here in the state of Georgia, but it's part of the Easy Pass network, and so that also works in other states too. And I think that ultimately that should be a goal of interoperability, right? Is to really create that seamless user experience for the end user, with the right back end systems that deliver that in a safe and secure way. And so maybe, as we kind of, transition towards the latter half of our session, I'll also ask about just kind of like looking ahead. Well, what are some things over the horizon from some of the topics that your organizations are working on that you think would be an interesting takeaway for the audience related to some of the topics around standards, interoperability, or just ITS in general that we've talked about today?
So, I mean, I'm going to allude to a comment that Matt made about, the issue of, components that, aren't locally made or foreign made. That's an issue that we've obviously, supply chain and, you know, promoting domestic manufacturing and growing the domestic base is something we're definitely involved with. We've actually got a Make in America program to help show how the industry is already trying to meet these increasing domestic content requirements. We know this is not going to go away, and it's going to continue with the current administration. We get it. We want to bring manufacturing back uh, to this country, and but it takes time to reorient supply chains and investment. So you have to make sure that the regulatory landscape allows flexibility to do that and scaling, leveraging what's already being done by industry. So that's kind of what I'm referring to as the program, what we're doing to verify domestic content. So that's something that we're looking at, and this idea of outcomes-based contracting, I think that's going to gain more traction as well. I think you'll see more and more states and localities try to adopt that, and it's sharing the success stories of that.
Yeah, very, very interesting. Is there a name for that program,
It's
Steve?
yeah, it's our Make in America program. I can send it out to
Yeah,
you.
that'd be great. I think that would be of interest for, some of the folks in the audience, both, as public agencies looking to procure solutions, as well as the companies
Yeah,
themselves as saying, hey, we have this, certification, so to speak, that
yeah,
kind of verifies or
yeah,
provides some base level of
yeah,
assurance.
yeah.
I think that's super helpful. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm happy to actually if I put that in the chat maybe. So
Yeah, yeah. That's great. Yeah,
Well,
Matt, go ahead.
uh, uh, going along the same lines, maybe slightly different kind of sales pitching another community of practice that's going through, if you don't mind, since we're getting near the end. The cybersecurity community of practice, one of the avenues was looking at the MUTCD manual for uniform traffic control devices, if I remember correctly. I am not traditionally a transportation person. Long time in the judicial branch more than before I got here, so hopefully I remember that acronym. Um, we're looking at introducing the various guidance around cybersecurity within that extremely large document. Uh, Hopefully, much of the guidance is at a high level, that enterprise level of breaking down the silos that I mentioned earlier, but then also looking at recommending um, some of the various standards that are out there, like what NEMA puts together, looking at what NIST has, looking at some of the other things that have come out recently out of DHS CISA, and that first level of recommendations that go out um, to see if we can then have a second community practice to really dive deeper into what goes into the next recommendations for the MUTCD. I've started working on it here with our California version and the people at Caltrans there, just so that they have an idea of what's coming down the pipe. All the states have to adopt what comes out of MUTCD, the large version, but they have the ability to append their own information. So a little bit of a sales pitch if you're interested. I've seen a few of the names over in the attendees room who are part of that. So just throwing it out there. We're always looking for more feedback.
That's great, Matt. And did you say that there was also a link that you're able to share as well, or is perhaps ITS America going to share a link on that?
I think it would have to be up to the ITS America folks, the names I
Okay.
saw in the
Yeah.
tent, if they wanted to or not.
Okay, sounds good. And in any case, if you're interested in learning more and getting involved, reach out to, Matt or the ITSA team, and they can get you guys plugged in on that. And just a sidebar on the MUTCD, I think it'd be also interesting to have, some tools that help navigate that a little bit easier, given I think it's like got over 1,000 pages, maybe you got more. Sounds like a
Yeah.
perfect use case for AI to help summarize some key excerpts to help navigate some of those guidance. But yeah. All right. Madeline, any exciting initiatives and things over the horizon that you're working on for the audience here?
Quite a few. I mean, a lot of it is in that sort of autonomous area, a lot of it in autonomous cyber defense, in fact. So like looking over the horizon into what it means when adversaries have machine speed stuff as well as we do, and typically when infrastructure is much more decentralized. And I mean, also talking back to the points that Matt and Steve were talking about, was resilience and sovereignty is coming up quite a lot in the work that we do. So how do you keep things safe and sovereign within your own nation? And there's lots of technical aspects to that as well that is changing architectures and changing how we do things. Things like continuous monitoring is going to be even more important for that resilience. So all these kind of buzzwords are coming through in a lot of future initiatives.
Excellent. And look very, excited to hear more from that, and as well as any literature you might be able to share you think would be relevant for the audience. Feel free to drop that in the chat as well. And then of course, Megan, want to make sure that we hear the latest and greatest from Cavnew. I'm sure there's some, new exciting releases being planned for, and to the extent that you're able to share, would welcome any insights you have on those.
Yeah, so we are in the middle of deploying our project on SH-130 in Texas. That has, poles in the ground and cameras going up, and we're really excited to get that system operational here very soon. As it relates to this conversation, a project is, initially focused on some real-time data use cases to support traffic operations. But as related to interoperability and working across different groups, Matt, as you mentioned, that same data has other use cases for planning functions. Obviously, we have the driver learning that I mentioned, and we do want to make sure that we're serving the multitude of use cases that we can to support the efficient operations of roads, both in real time, but also for these other functions that are really critical to those outcomes that we all endeavor to see. And so when we think about interoperability, not only from a traveling public, user perspective, but also from different, I guess, agencies or functions within an agency, to really get the most use out of those types of systems. And where, as I mentioned on the SH-130 project, we're working actively with TxDOT through many of the issues that we just talked about here regarding, privacy and cybersecurity and integration and all of that. And we're hopeful that as we bring that deployment live, that we get to start to see the efficacy of those data services towards all of those end use cases that I just mentioned. So.
That's great, and excited to hear more about the SH-130 project as it continues to progress and benefit the communities in Texas. Just in the last few minutes here, I want to make sure that we also have a chance to include some audience provided questions. So I've just got them pulled up here. I think the first question here is, is for Steve. How does NEMA make sure that NEMA standards are being considered for rural ITS demands? Many municipalities and counties only go with contractors' feedback and/or state standards instead of, understanding their own needs. Any perspective on that, Steve?
That's a great question, and I think that's something that we have decided to we make sure that we're hearing the rural ITS as well.
Yeah.
So we've definitely decided to increase our outreach to those locations to make sure that we're understanding their needs, their concerns, because they are the ones that are, obviously a little bit more resource constrained on these kind of issues. The whole idea of the outcomes-based procurement is also another good solution for those jurisdictions. But great question and something we're going to continue to address moving forward.
Yeah, thanks for that, Steve. And then the next question I have here is a participant asked about, can you talk about transit pass interoperability? And so, I know that, in California, for instance, I believe there's the Cal ITP program, which is attempting to bring together various transit systems to make kind of to both promote interoperability, but also to make it easier for travelers to plan and pay for their trips using a unified portal. So, any thoughts there, Matt? Not sure if you're directly involved, but perhaps maybe some of your colleagues might be.
I'm aware of it. I'm not directly involved with it. It's
Yeah.
something that I believe grew out of some efforts at Caltrans across multiple districts,
Yeah.
working with the different lanes that we have here and some of the municipalities and what they're working on, but also some private industry. So I think there's a partnership with the Caltrans and the California Department of Technology and how they're working with that. But I haven't been specifically in that project. I tend to, being that it's a bit of that partnership with private industry as well as public, I tend to focus more into my internal department specific risk management efforts and less on a lot of those areas that bridge between the two industries or between public and private sector.
Yeah, thanks for that, Matt. And I think for folks who are interested in learning more about the program, happy to drop in a link to in the chat if you want to find out. And of course, we can always reach out to Matt after the fact to see if we can get plugged in with some of the colleagues from CalSTA and other Caltrans agencies that are involved with that initiative. So I think in the final minute or so, I want to maybe ask the panelists here just to have one leave behind, just a kind of short takeaway for the audience at home. And as you think about the topics of standards and interoperability and ITS, procurement, what are some things that they can take away? And we'll just do a quick around the horn and conclude. Yeah.
So I guess mine would be just to take into account multidisciplinarity, making sure that multi-disciplines are in the room so that we get the biggest coverage of everything as we're trying to move forward.
Great, thank you.
I was going along the same lines, echo what Madeline just said of having the right people in the room or how you're going to, that's where I go with business continuity planning, disaster recovery planning, incident response. That communication goes across the entire organization, regardless of how you define it, whether it's a small part or a large part. And that's probably the biggest thing to understand what your enterprise is really working towards and what their goals are.
I'll just say that making sure that the standards we set are pointing directly to the outcomes that we expect, I think is really critical.
Yeah, thank you.
And then I'll just add on to that, making sure that when we're getting everyone involved in the standards, making sure all the stakeholders are engaged to help drive documents to meet the outcomes that Megan talked about. So.
Oh, fantastic. Well, I think we're at the top of the hour and just really want to thank all of our panelists here for the brilliant insights and their time today to contribute to this very important conversation. We look forward to continuing the conversation on the next Emerging Technology Procurement series, and hope everyone has a wonderful day. Thanks again for making the time. Take care. Thank you all.